Seeing as it's still relatively new, I'll sing through the melody once, just for you to learn it again, and then we'll sing it together, first the reo Māori, and then the English. E te ariki kia aroha mai, e te karaiti kia aroha mai, e te ariki kia aroha mai, kia aroha mai, e te ariki. E te ariki kia aroha mai, e te karaiti kia aroha mai, e te ariki kia aroha mai, kia aroha mai. O Lord, have mercy. O Lord, have mercy. Have mercy on us. O Christ, have mercy. Have mercy on us. O Lord, have mercy. Have mercy on us. Have mercy on us.
You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember him and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow down all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. And a reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said this all quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." This is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Well, as Jordan mentioned, we see crosses in all kinds of places. We see them as earrings and necklaces. We see them as hot cross buns even before we've left the season of Epiphany. We get through Christmas and there are the hot cross buns. Not that I don't like hot cross buns. And of course, in our homes, there are often crosses as well. At a quick count, we were up to 7. And then there are crosses on memorials, on Anzac plaques, on headstones, all over the place, crosses. And of course, as we heard mentioned, in churches as well. In churches, in all kinds of ways, on Ash Wednesday, we put a cross, ash cross on our foreheads with the words, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." Such a poignant moment. And on Palm Sunday, we will be given flax crosses to take away for the year. They're all quite portable, these crosses, quite tidy, quite convenient. But the cross was never meant to be tidy. Tom Long recounts an article in the Wall Street Journal about a Californian congregation that went to the local zoning commission with plans for a new church building. They found in the meeting dozens of their neighbours protesting against the church's plans. One of the neighbours said, a new church building will just generate more traffic and more noise. And another said, I don't want to get up in the morning and look out my window and see a church. I want to see the mountains, not a cross. So they reached a compromise. The congregation redesigned the church so that it looked like a split-level house, like all the other houses in the street. And as regards the cross, they placed a tiny cross discreetly over the doorway so no one would ever be bothered by the church. I want to see the mountains, not a cross. You know, I think the local community was onto something. They might have sensed just how much of a bother that cross is. And it's as much a bother for the church as it is for the community. And if the cross is a bother, then the Church of the Cross, as the neighbours recognised, will also be a bother. The title of this sermon, No Handle on the Cross, is taken from a book written by a Japanese theologian, Kosuke Koyama, who in the 1970s taught just across the road here in the Religious Studies Department at the university. He went on from here to a very distinguished career at Union Seminary in New York and is regarded as one of the leading missiologists of the 20th century. A marvelous, wonderful man. Koyama contrasted the inconvenience of the cross with the convenience of a Japanese businessman's lunchbox. He was very familiar with Japanese businessmen lunch boxes because he grew up in Japan. And he noted how convenient the lunchbox was. It was tidy, it was able to be picked up easily, it was able to be put away in a discreet way. There was nothing terribly intrusive about it. It was very functional, very utilitarian. In contrast, says Koyama, the cross has no handle. It is awkward and inconvenient and untidy and bothersome. There is no handle on the cross. Ched Myers, a New Testament scholar, says this: the cross was not a religious icon in first century Palestine, nor was taking up the cross a metaphor for personal anguish. Crucifixion had only one connotation: the vicious form of capital punishment reserved by imperial Rome for political dissidents. Crosses were a common sight at the time Mark wrote the Gospel, amidst the Jewish insurrection of 66 AD. Myers notes that in contrast to Judean nationalists who were recruiting patriots to take up the sword against Rome, Mark's Jesus invited disciples not to take up the sword, but to take up the cross. So, says Myers, taking up the cross is not a metaphor for personal anguish. It's not about bearing an illness or a difficult relationship as if it is our cross, the cross we must bear. No, Jesus is speaking about the pain and the difficulty that come as a result of following him. Many have suggested that the modern equivalent of the cross might be the electric chair. The cross was, after all, the way in which the Roman Empire subjugated people. Crucifixion was the way the government deterred people from defying the emperor. Crosses stood at intersections to remind people of the cost of defiance. Imagine if the equivalent of the cross is the electric chair. Imagine an electric chair in the middle of the octagon, or just here on the corner of Pitt and George, perhaps just in front of the statue of Donald Stewart, reminding us that this is what will happen to you if you disobey the Roman Empire. Jesus was alerting his followers that the gospel represented a challenge to the empire, and the cost for him would be the electric chair. And he tells them the same might be true for you. There are famous words of George MacLeod, founder of the Iona community. These are words worth repeating every year, I think. George MacLeod said, "I simply argue that the cross be raised again at the centre of the marketplace, as well as on the steeple of the church. I am recovering the claim that Jesus was not crucified in a cathedral between two candles, but on a cross between two thieves, on a town garbage heap, at a crossroads of politics so cosmopolitan that they had to write his name, his title, in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek, and at the kind of place where cynics talk smut and thieves curse and soldiers gamble, because that is where he died, and that is what he died about, and that is where Christ's own ought to be, and that is what church people ought to be about." Well, we read these words. Jesus called the crowd with the disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." But what does that mean in New Zealand today, when we will never be crucified or killed in an electric chair? Well, sometimes, says Tom Long, the commands of Jesus and the demands of life, a job, a social setting, or a relationship, are in tension, if not outright conflict. And the workaday life of Christians is filled with 1,000 moral dilemmas. So to take up our cross means to face the moral dilemmas of our everyday living. How do we cherish creation in our everyday living? How can our work and our study and our recreation be life-giving? How can we help change the systems that privilege some and exclude others again and again and again? How can we stand with those who are most marginalized as we go about our studies, our work, our lives? It's bothersome stuff. It faces us with moral dilemmas. And it's not just bothersome stuff, it's stretching stuff. As MacLeod says, the cross takes us outside the city wall to where human experience is intense. Carrying our cross involves being with people in the intensity of their living, the intensity of dying and death, the intensity of grieving, the intensity of illness and struggle, the intensity of prejudice and exclusion, the intensity of poverty and injustice. The cross stands, someone said, in the hot white centre of the world's pain. And we're not just to glance in the general direction of suffering and then slide away, rather to go there, to identify ourselves with those who are aching and weeping and screaming and dying, to recognize Christ crucified in every suffering soul and body that surrounds us. Bothersome stuff, intense stuff. And yet, there is a promise here. And it's a promise that feeds the courage to deal with the bothersome stuff and the intense stuff. For the cross is God's assurance that we are held, that we are held, that we are held in the utter, unfailing, final love of God. Unfailing to the point of death and beyond. Unfailing. The cross we carry is a sign of absolute love, that God will never let us go. That's what drove him to the cross. And that promise feeds our courage to go to the most intense experiences of pain and grief that people bear, of poverty and injustice in our world, and to find there the crucified Christ. Bearing the cross means being marked with the love of Christ. The love of God is tattooed on our hearts. Bother, intensity, and love. I rarely preach 3-point sermons, but maybe today. Bother, because we take up a cross that brings moral dilemmas in our daily living. And so it involves ethics. Intensity, because we take up a cross that leads us to life's most difficult places and life's most difficult people. And so it nourishes empathy and love, because we take up a cross that represents God's commitment to humanity, to creation, to us, to be with us in all of life. And so it nourishes the courage we need to be bothered and to go to the places where people's experience is often incredibly intense. I know that as a minister. I know that as a minister of this congregation. Let's spend a moment in quietness.